Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jerry Sansing. This is another edition of What's Going On in Corpus Christi. It's the May the 25th. On Monday, it's Memorial Day, and I'd like to extend my gratitude to all of the veterans who perished in all the wars up to this point, and I've had relatives in that category. Then, since 1770s, when my family, on both sides of my family, were shooting it out at redcoats in the 1770s, and then all the way up through Vietnam and so forth. Now, they have fought and died, folks, for my right of free speech, First Amendment rights, and I have no fear of telling things the way it is, and I hope that you understand that if I get a little bit blunt, then that's just my nature. That's a good military upbringing that I did from my parents. Okay? So thank you all, and all the families too, who've lost dear ones and so forth in the wars trying to protect our freedom and freedom of speech, which I'm going to exercise at this point. Okay? Now, I was going to reiterate that in August of 2013, I went to a workshop with the Board of Regents of Del Mar College, and I heard the CFO of that college over there indicate that there was some money that was owed to Del Mar College, and he was going to request that that be written off, taken off the books as bad debt. So he also indicated that he had exhausted all collection capabilities and avenues and so forth, and he could not collect those, so he was asking the president to write them off. Now, those 3 pages that indicated that were buried in about a 5-foot stack of other paperwork that says that they couldn't collect this, that, and the other. Now, so I singled out those 3 pages. It was like finding a needle in a haystack, and I pursued that, along with the man who has a master's in science and accounting, and he also has a business degree, okay, in accounting, bachelor's degree in accounting, and he's been a CPA, certified public accountant, for about 30 years. He's worked with some of the biggest companies in the country, and he knows the accounting business inside and out, so he knows of what he speaks. Now, we went and asked and took a look at the first indication we had of write-offs, which is $185,000 plus, and that's what the CFO had requested, that Dr. Mark Escamilla, the president of Del Mar College, sanction writing off. Now, in my request under Public Information Act to get that information, I made it quite clear that I wanted to have any and all documents that indicated that the collections had been tried to, had been done. That means return receipt from the post office. It means lawsuits and any other method by which Del Mar College went about collecting or attempting to collect those monies. And I had absolutely zero information regarding that. So I don't know where the screw up was, folks, but it was apparent to me that all avenues had not been exhausted to collect that money. So then we looked at the $185,000. That was the first documents that we found, and in those documents it was stated that Texas A&M University, Kingsville, owed Del Mar College over $54,000, and it was written off. Now, I've tried to get to the bottom of that since October of 2013, and I still haven't got a decent answer, a legitimate answer yet as to why Kingsville owed us that money and why it was written off. I haven't got it. So I've tried back through Texas A&M University, Kingsville. They will not cooperate. Del Mar College says that it's none of my business, and they don't have any reason for that, don't need to really give it to me. And I've got a real hot flash. I'm going to continue on until I figure out what happened. Now, in that same document, we had $89,000, I think it was, that was owed to us by the Coastal Bend Council of Governments. And why? And why would they write that off? And then we had various different entities around here. I think CCAD was one of them, and CCISD, and some of these other people around here, the Army Depot. But, you know, it just didn't make any sense to me, and particularly not since there were no documents that would be provided to me, or to us, I should say, Mr. Ed Bennett, indicating that they made a valid attempt to collect that money. Okay? Now, subsequently, we've asked for some other information. Now, Mr. Bennett, knowing what was going on, asked for the general ledger information for the 7 accounts that they said that they had taken these from and were writing it off. And he was presented with a letter resulting from his Public Information Act request that it would take $26.7 million, that's million with an M, folks, which is an exorbitant amount of money, and it'd take 120 years to round up all of those documents, and it was 105 million documents that was contained in those general ledgers. Now, that's just not true. So after some bad press, and Delmar put out through their PR department that the reason for that, when the local news, Channel 6, KRIS, came in and took a look at that and put about 3 days worth of questions on the air on the news broadcast, then all of a sudden it was a mathematical error. Now, whoever and however it got up to a person writing a news story about Public Information Act requests and ridiculous answers and this type of stuff, singled out that $26.7 million debacle, and the same PR person said that no, that was just asked for exorbitant amounts of information. Now, which is it, folks? Was it a mathematical error just to make people go away, or what? Then the Board of Regents attorney, Mr. Augustin Rivera, spent 14 minutes with Dr. Bennett and myself at a meeting, and all of a sudden, bam, here's your 200 and some odd pages is all it was. We finally figured out what you were asking for, so we'll just go ahead and give it to you for nothing. Now, that's a tactic, folks, to run people off and discourage them. So, you know, they're not fooling anybody around town. Now, subsequent to that, Mr. Bennett and I have uncovered, since 2007, more write-offs. And though the total amount is now up to $2.838 million. Okay? Now, that's a whole lot of money, folks, just to be writing off. And we've requested some information for that, and it's been delay after delay after delay to get it. And then I've got letters here where we've had our high-priced attorneys over here, Graves Daughtry out of Austin, who works for the college. Why they have to go outside of the city, I'm not sure. That sounds an awful lot to me like it's real similar to the city paying $3.5 million to outside attorneys in 2004 alone. So I'll address that in a minute. Okay. Now, this is taxpayer money, and the reason I'm interested, folks, is I am the president of the Corpus Christi Taxpayers Association. I've been associated with them for about 20 years. I went in when Joe O'Brien was president, and he saved you fine folks out there a whole heck of a lot of money. And then when he was stepped down, then Jack Gordy took over, and up until about a year and a half ago, and Mr. Gordy thought he was going to have to leave town for various reasons, and he was resigned to that fact. He was going to move up to the hill country somewhere, and then he nominated me, and the general membership voted me in as the president at that time. And then Mr. Gordy subsequently is not going to leave the area, so he's now the vice president of our group. Okay, and I'm still the president. Now, the reason that we've got the Corpus Christi Taxpayers Association, ladies and gentlemen, is to go ahead and make some sense out of this and see if we're being duped, ripped off, or whatever, and abused as taxpayers. I work real hard for my money, and so does everybody else, I think, in this town, except maybe the chosen few. But I resent the fact that these elected officials just, go ahead and stick it in the toilet and then go ahead and flush it on down the drain and have no reservations, no remorse, and so forth when they do that. And it's all about making money for all of their business buddies in the real estate cartel as far as the city goes. Now, after this broke, and we're still trying to get information about this, and I understand there's some more write-offs that are needed to be made, and I'll discuss that at a little bit later date. I've got some real gut-wrenching information about that, and I guess I'm going to have to be prepared for another 50 years trying to get public information. Maybe not after I go up to Austin and visit with the Attorney General. Now, Mr. Gordy, as I said, Vice President of the Taxpayers Association, was real concerned about the $2,838,327 of debt that was owed to Delmar and has been written off so far. And that's just what we can find, okay? There's no paper trail, no explanation for an awful lot of this stuff being written off, and nobody wants to talk about it, okay? Now, Mr. Gordy today called me, and that's the reason I decided to go ahead and film today. This one floored me. He has written a letter to all of the regents, and let me read it to you, okay? He wrote this on June, I guess it was actually May the 9th, 2015. It says, this is something that this Board of Regents needs to get involved in and start asking questions, okay? The Delmar Accounting Department does not care about the taxpayers that live in the Delmar district. If they cared about the taxpayers, they would not write off debts that are owed to Delmar College. Now, this was dated June the 9th. I think this is the date of the next Board of Regents meeting. So I was in error with he has the correct date on it. The accounting department has written off at least that much money, okay? I and all the taxpayers would like to know how this Board of Regents can allow this to happen and never question the write-offs, okay? All of you should know that this is not right, and it is not what you were elected to do. You all were elected to represent the taxpayers and make sure that Delmar staff does the right thing, okay? Not one of you can say that you did not know about the write-offs because it has been on the news a couple of times, more than once, okay? If you are not going to ask questions and find out why the accounting department wrote off these debts and order them to collect the money owed to Delmar College, it is time for all of you to resign and let someone that will do the right thing take over your positions. All of you should ask the Delmar College president how he can justify those write-offs and not question them. Respectfully, Jack Gordy. Now, what happened after that, Mr. Gordy contacted or tried to contact the Board of Regents members and asked them some questions, and I guess I don't know if it's Miss or Mrs. Sandra L. Messbarger at large. Her term expires in 2018. Then what she did was she told Mr. Gordy on the telephone today that she was not going to say a word about it, and that it wasn't any of his business what was going on over there, and that there were reasons that that stuff was written off. But she did not want to and will not discuss that. Okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, what in the world is that all about? Now, I've seen most of these board members sit on their butts and do absolutely nothing except sit there and drink free coffee, eat lunches over there and so forth, and just bless everything that goes on over there. It's my personal opinion that there's not a single one of them. Well, I'll make the exception. Mr. Guy Watts cares an awful lot about this. Okay? Now, so here we've got 8 out of 9 people who really don't give a rip. Now, why doesn't Mr. Trey McCampbell, the president, or the chair, excuse me, of the Board of Regents members, okay, then why in the world, as an accountant himself, he claims, why is he not paying attention to your taxpayers' money out there? Okay? Why, Mr. McCampbell? You know, I'm going to ask you that question on every show. Why don't you jump in there and find out what in the world is going on, and why do you let this bad press continue on? It just baffles me. I mean, it really does. So, ladies and gentlemen, if this disturbs you with all the money that they're writing off, that's your taxpayers' money. And then they'll say, well, some of it's federal and state. Well, are you federal taxpayer? Are you a state taxpayer when you buy certain things? Then what they do is when we ask for some of this stuff under Open Records Act, we have this expensive, as I say, attorney group out of Austin. It's Graves, Daughtry, and so forth. And then they write opinions to the Attorney General, the Honorable Ken Paxton up in Austin, and ask him to render an opinion on whether we need to get our information that we've asked for or not. And then the Attorney General writes back letters to in this case, Miss Tammy McDonald. She's the Executive Director of Human Resources and Administration, and she's also claims to be the Public Information Act officer. So she's the one that receives them. The President should get them. I give them to him, and then he passes them off down to Mrs. McDonald. Okay? And then Mr. Paxton also has written back to Mr. William Christian. He's the attorney for Gray. He's the counsel for Delmar District, and he's the person in charge for Graves, Daughtry, Heron, and Moody out of Austin. And then, you know, if you can read through that, it's just like reading fairy tales at times. Okay? But this is what you do. And then, of course, they're billing you about $400 an hour from Graves, Daughtry up there. So we're spending a lot of money out of town, folks. And I've asked for stuff. I'm going to discuss a run-in I've had with Delmar College with my department chair and so forth and so on, and Dean and the president over there about some disciplinary action that they said that I was involved with, and I asked for the information I needed to defend myself, and they refused that. Okay? So I'm going to make a whole show out of that one here soon. That one ain't over. Okay? So I'm just biding my time, and I've never seen people that can stretch the truth quite as far as Delmar College administration does. Okay, now, then there's another problem we've got with the city, and this is Mr. Gordy again. He's very outspoken for us and so forth and so on, and we're taking care of the financial end, and he's taking care of other business. But if you go over to Airline in the 1300 block, I think that's the, I forget what the name of that strip center is over there across from the main shopping center. Is it Gulfway or Breezeway or something like that? If you go and look down those sidewalks, you've got palm trees that are growing out right in the middle of the sidewalks. And those were put in prior to 1990. Now what happened with that is the Americans with Disabilities Act was written in 1990, I believe, and it stated that you have to have a certain clearance on any obstacle along sidewalks and so forth, and they need to be, I think, 32 or 36 inches so people can get by, especially if they're wheelchair bound or in walkers and so forth. Now there's not but about 16 inches on either side of those palm trees, so you either have to go around 16 inches and bump up against the little retaining wall, or you can go out into the street on the other side to get around those palm trees. But that is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay? Now, Mr. Gordy, or the American Disabilities Act, the ADA. Now, what Mr. Gordy was trying to do, being a good citizen, and Delmar got sued a while back by a wheelchair-bound person who attends the city council meetings frequently down there, and he had ADA come in, the people from the, I think it's Justice Department, and say, you guys need to take the end of these sidewalks and knock them off and then make the little ramps so that they are wheelchair accessible. And that's been done all over town. Now the city didn't want to do that, but they were bound by the ADA and had to do it. Okay. Now Mr. Gordy has brought this to the attention of the city fathers time and time again. And what's happened is they ignore him. And then we've got this new attorney, I think his name is Miles Risley or Risley. I've mentioned him before. And I'll talk about him first as the Memorial Coliseum, okay, the Friends of the Coliseum. But he states that since those sidewalks were put in prior to 1990, that the city is exempt from having to take care of that. Now, that's just not true. We've talked to the people up there with the ADA, and they say, no, that's not true. But I guess the city, through its city attorney, is still, hell-bent on trying to blame it and say, well, we can't afford to cut down those trees and grind the stumps down and pour concrete in there and comply to ADA. Now, that leaves me horrified, folks. Now, I don't know how much fine is about ready to come down, but I do know that people have been in contact with the Department of Justice about the ADA violations here, and in June we're going to find out what's going to happen with this. Okay, so Mr. Gordy on May the 12th had written a letter for the mayor and council members. It said the city council, all 9 members, can look forward to a lawsuit being filed sometime in June 2015 against the city of Corpus Christi for not complying with the American Disabilities Act. This city council is responsible for the lawsuit being filed because the city could have stopped the lawsuit. All they had to do was order the city manager to have the palm trees on Airline cut down and the sidewalk widened to be in compliance with the ADA, okay, the American Disabilities Act. The cost of the lawsuit should not come out of city funds. The city council should pay the total cost of the lawsuit out of their own pockets. The reason for this is because your actions by not doing what you should have caused lawsuit to be filed. This city council paying for the lawsuit out of their pockets is what would be fair and right for the taxpayers. Okay. And then he's written a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice, Disability Rights Section in D.C., okay, to whom it may concern. This is a follow-up on the complaint I filed against the city of Corpus Christi for not complying with the American Disabilities Act. The complaint was dated February 23, 2015. A copy is enclosed. Enclosed you will find copies of additional letters that I have sent to city manager, city attorney, and all city council members. You will also find a copy of the response I received from the city manager. His response does not seem to be a true statement. It's only his opinion. Okay? And then he goes on and states when the act was done, and he said he's had enough, and that part of that was the city father said that it cost too much to cut down 3 or 4 or 5 palm trees, grind the stumps, and then go ahead and pour concrete in there, and that they're not liable for that anyway. They're not responsible. They have been, I guess, they've been exempt somewhere along the way. Now, I've asked people why these streets that were built way before 1990 when the act came through, why are we knocking down the ends of those sidewalks and putting the ramps and making all these sidewalks in town wheelchair accessible? And that was due to the lawsuit filed several years ago by a person that is wheelchair bound. Okay? So I asked a safety person the other day who is well aware of those things, and he said, oh no, nobody's exempt from anything. You've got to be kidding me that the palm trees are growing out of there. I said, well, go over there to that shopping center on Airline, 1300 block, and take a look for yourself. And it horrified him. He said, well, there are no exemptions with ADA. So I don't know who's correct. I'm just saying that if we do get fined, I'm going to go back everything that Mr. Gordy has said about that, and I want the individual council members to pay any fines that may come down from the Department of Justice in relation to that. And then we've got another problem around here that's going to cost a bunch of money, and this came out in the Caller Times back on May the 2nd, about 3 weeks ago. Friends of Coliseum wins the battle. Well, no, I don't know that I'm one of the 5 of the Friends of the Coliseum that got sued by the city, but they can't read their contract, folks. And the 13th Court of Appeals read this contract, and they concurred that we were correct when we said that they're out of line down there when it comes to the act, okay? Suspension by court order, and I think I've got the whole paragraph here. This is the contract between the Memorial Coliseum Demolition Company, the A&R Demolition Services, and the City of Corpus Christi. And it states quite clearly, and this is a direct reprint from that contract. It says B-7-11 suspension by court order. The contractor shall suspend such part or parts of the work ordered by the court and will not be entitled to additional compensation by virtue of such court order. Neither will he be liable to the city in the event and for the time the work is suspended by a court order. Now, Carlos Valdez couldn't figure that out. I don't know if he needs it written in some other language. I mean, if it were in Yiddish, I could probably help him out some, but it's in the Queen's English right there. And then I was going to talk about the Grass Gestapo, also known as the code enforcement around here. And I found some very interesting numbers. I had my round with them when my wife was very ill, and she passed away not too long after we got hassled by these folks. But they give you, and this came out, I think it was a Sunday paper. It was on the May the 10th. If you want to go back and look it up in the Caller Times, it says trash, overgrown lawns, weeds could be costly. And it gives you a breakdown of how many cases they've had down there and how many fines for each type of case, and then the total amount of money. And I don't know how they can keep a court going down there without spending a lot of other money besides this. But I do know that as I drive through the neighborhoods, and particularly along city property, parks and so forth, and different venues and buildings owned by the city, the grass problem is abysmal. And if you go over on Ohio Street, probably about in that 1500 block or so, then all you got to do is you can't see, if you walk into the middle of one of those vacant lots there in between 2 small houses, you can't see over the top of the weeds. And I don't see any signs out there, and I don't know who owns the property, but the city says they'll go in and cut it down and then bill the landowner. But it's looks like a jungle in there, folks. And why the 2 neighbors over there and the ones across the street aren't jumping up and down raising Cain, I don't know. And then I have a friend of mine who owns some rental property, and the code enforcement people walked through his private fence and carried a person who had lost her lease on that. She was going to try to get my friend in trouble as the landlord, and so they aided her in criminal trespass on his property, going through a security gate. Okay, so I've seen some real horror tales with this code enforcement folks, and why they think they are so powerful, I don't know. But I'm gonna hire a constitutional attorney, and we're going to find out whether they have the right to go through your privacy fence and into your and demand that a property owner lets you in to inspect the internal part of that house. Okay, when there's nothing wrong with it. It's called harassment, folks, and that's why I call them the Grass Gestapo. I know I shouldn't do things like that, but those are Gestapo tactics when they came over here and did the same thing in my yard. And, maybe I have a recourse legally one of these days with that. I'm going to find out for sure. So I guess I could go on and on with this, with Delmar and the city and the county and so forth and so on. But I'm down to about less than 40 seconds, and I hope my videographer can go ahead and cut this off. I guess he's had a hard time with me not timing him just right, so I apologize. But if you want to have a good time, folks, the first Saturday of every month, the Taxpayers Association meets over at the Delicatessen Small Planet on Saratoga and Staples at 2 o'clock. So please join us over there. So anybody wants to join, you can be easy to find. Okay, so good night.